a nuestro podcast sobre Brasil.
Elizabeth, this is Brazil we're talking about.
Right, I know that. What's the problem?
It was a colony of Portugal. Portugal.
They speak Portuguese, not Spanish.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Okay. Oopsies. Okay, but seriously, does anybody know how to speak Portuguese here?
Not me.
Of course I know how to speak Portuguese.
Sure you do.
Yeah, right.
Alright, take this. Hola, bem-vindos a nosso podcast en Brasilia.
Oh, guys, I think you got us there.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Okay, and anyways, we need to get started with this video.
Well, for those of you who don't speak Spanish or Portuguese, welcome to our video podcast about Brazil. My name is Sterling.
And I'm Elizabeth.
I'm Allison.
I'm Keith, and you know guys, the official topic is Portugal colonies in the Americas.
Right, which is Brazil.
You betcha.
Sure.
Today we're going to be talking specifically about Colonia Brazil while under the control of the Portuguese. Around the time that Columbus sailed the ocean blue, Spain and Portugal agreed on the Treaty of Tordesillas that officially allowed the Portuguese to claim land east of the line of demarcation.
While the treaty granted the Portuguese expansive claims in Asia and Africa, it did not grant them much land in the Americas, only a small section of coastline in central South America bordering the South Atlantic Ocean.
Brazil was officially discovered on April 22, 1500, by a Portuguese fleet commanded by Pedro Alvarez Cabral. While on an expedition to India, Cabral happened to sail a bit too far west and came across the land, which he claimed in the name of King Manuel I of Portugal.
Although the land was officially claimed by the beginning of the 16th century, Portugal initially concentrated its resources and energies on Asia and Africa. Thus, the king was slow to implement a legitimate colonial governmental system. Not much ruling occurred, per se.
Pero Vaz de Caminha wrote that during Cabral's discovery of Brazil, he and his crew immediately noticed entirely naked, dark-skinned men walking on the beach as his ship approached on the Bahian coast.
Thus, a cultural exchange began that would evolve over the next 5 centuries into the distinctive Brazilian culture.
About 30 years after discovery, King John III of Portugal made a first move towards an official government and set up Brazil as 15 private hereditary captaincies, or areas of land granted to Portuguese noblemen who wanted and had the means to administer them. The captains were given ample powers to manage control over their territory.
Their prosperity was simply based upon success in their economic endeavors.
At this point in time, the captains made money by extracting Brazil wood from the rainforest for its valuable wood and for the red dye derived from it.
Wait, Brazil would?
Yeah, that's how Brazil got its name. You knew that, right?
No. What is this? I never knew that. This is awkward.
Oh, Allison. Okay, anyways. Of the captaincies, Pernambuco was one of the most successful ones, belonging to Duarte Coelho, who founded the first city of Olinda in 1536.
His captaincy prospered by implementing sugarcane mills installed after 1542.
This practice of producing sugar quickly spread due to the great success that Coelho's captaincy experienced.
Since sugar was a sought-after commodity in Europe, it became the main export for the next 150 years.
This chunk of Brazilian history is known as the sugar cycle, dating from circa 1530 to about 1700. Ooh, periodization!
Woo! Despite the huge success in Pernambuco.
Wait, also, FYI, beginning in about 1531, cattle were imported in Brazil, and a cattle industry developed rapidly in response to the needs of the sugar industry for transportation and food.
Thanks for remembering that one.
Food.
Beef or no beef, 13 of the 15 captaincies failed, leading the king to make colonization a royal effort rather than a private one.
In 1549, the king selected Tomé de Sousa to sail to Brazil and establish a central government. He appointed a governor-general to rule and made Salvador the capital.
De Sousa brought with him Jesuits, people of a sect of Catholicism known as the Society of Jesus, who set up missions that saved many natives from slavery and converted them.
Manuel de Nobrega served as a leader for the first Jesuits and established missions in Salvador and Sao Paulo.
Of course, with the Jesuits came widespread Catholicism, only intensifying the Catholic practices already present by the Portuguese.
While the direct European settlers continued to practice traditional Roman Catholicism, Some Brazilians would practice something called folk Catholicism. This sect was a combination of animism or nature culture with Catholicism, which could manifest in many different forms, such as polytheism, occultic spiritism, or superstitious Catholicism.
OMG, syncretism!
Whoa, mind-blowing. The Indians responded to the Jesuits first with acceptance. The Jesuits blended Indian songs, dances, and language into the liturgy as the colonists adopted native foods, women, language, and customs.
During the latter part of the 16th century, governor-generals continued to rule in Brazil and deal with problems with foreigners, especially the French Calvinists, ultimately expelling them from the land.
Although the Portuguese didn't necessarily arrive in Brazil for intellectual purposes, the Jesuits did offer schooling and participated in intellectual activities themselves.
Por exemplo, which, by the way, means for example in Portuguese.
Oh goodness, Keith. Well, at least it's not Spanish.
Thank you. José de Anchieta, a Spanish Jesuit missionary, accompanied Government de Sá and became a highly influential figure in Brazil's history during the second half of the 16th century.
Anchieta was one of the founders of Sao Paulo in 1554 and Rio de Janeiro in 1565, both of which cities are to become places of great economic and cultural prosperity. He was a writer and poet and is considered the first Brazilian writer. Not only could he write, but he could write flawlessly in Spanish, Portuguese, Latin, and Tupi, serving as a valuable translator. He printed the first grammar of the Tupi, the indigenous people's language.
Hey Elizabeth, hold up. Are we not in the midst of the sugar cycle period? Why aren't we talking about sugar plantations?
Oh, yeah, right. Okay. Never fear. I shall return us to the economy. Okay. So initially the colonists used natives for a labor source and would develop a cruel internal slave trade, but soon leaned towards African slave trade, much like other colonizing European nations.
Although the natives and the colonists first accepted each other during early settlement, the new slave trades did not do much to strengthen their relationship. Their affiliations moved from relative tolerance to regression, then invasion, and enmity. The Portuguese began importing more African slaves due to the natives' resistance, social disintegration, and flight into the interior.
Since Portugal owned several slave trade ports in West Africa, it was easy for them to transfer slaves to Brazil to make up for the lacking native support and meet the increasing demands for plantation labor.
Brazil's involvement with the Portuguese monarchy didn't stop at internal slave transfers. The monarchy also put severe restrictions on trade. They were practicing something called mercantilism, as all international trade transactions were required to go through Portugal in order to bring the most profit back to the mother country.
The amount of slaves brought in by the beginning of the 17th century outrageously outnumbered the amount of Portuguese immigrants. Between 1650 and 1750, the ratio of slaves to immigrants was 5-1.
Also, FYI, the Portuguese had developed sugar plantation economies on the various islands of Madeira, Azores, Cape Verdes, and Sao Tome, so they could easily transfer the similar processes they have applied in those places.
The expansion of the sugar plantation economy is evident in when King Philip II divided Brazil into two estados, or states, in 1621, do Brasil e do Maranhão, as more land was needed for the massive plantations. The land area surpassed what was allotted in the Treaty of Tordesillas, but the line of demarcation was at this point imaginary and disregarded. This growth and split foreshadows Brazil's eventual growth to be the largest of all lands in South America.
The Brazilian sugar plantation was a very systematic and effective operation, making it desirable for profit and easily spread.
The enguejo, or sugarcane farm, included a casa grande, literally big house, where the owner of the farm lived with his family, and a senzala, where the slaves were kept.
The whole system of sugar production was not a very friendly process in all senses of the word. The only thing that was friendly about the whole situation was money. Money for the rich Portuguese owners.
Ooh, I got a nice quote to go with that. A sugar mill is hell and all the masters of them are damned, wrote Father Andres de Gueva from Bahia in 1627 after coming to Brazil. I think that about sums up the situation.
Although the conditions were quite terrible for anyone working under a master, they still would find ways to enjoy themselves and get a party going.
What do you know? I've got another primary research to go along with that. Although it's a bit out of our current time period of the 1600s, slaves were continually present in Brazil for centuries. Henry Coaster published this in his book entitled Travels of Brazil, 1809 to 1815.
I have heard the whispering in the negro huts, and have observed someone leave his house, and steal away to visit an acquaintance, residing at some distance, or there has been some feast or some merrymaking. Thus late at night, the slave has a natural bias to deceive him who holds him in subjection.
awesome. I just love primary resources.
Yay! Just for clarification, guys, Brazil didn't export only sugar, but tobacco and cotton were also common. However, sugarcane by far dominated the Brazilian economy.
Good point. And not all the trade was international either. Much interregional trade occurred with the neighboring Spanish colonies to the west. This trade relationship was strengthened by the union between Portugal and Spain, known as the Iberian Union.
Foreigners also continued to settle in Brazilian territory during the 17th century in an attempt to exploit the resources from which the Portuguese so profited, only to be continually banished.
The French returned again, this time settling at São Luís, but were purged by 1614. Conflicts with the Dutch over territory and sugar plantation trade also occurred in the 1600s. The Brazilians eventually drove the Dutch out as they formally withdrew from Brazil in 1661, but the Dutch gained enough technological and organizational knowledge to run their own sugar plantations in other colonies and lessen the monopoly that Brazil and Portugal maintained.
Brazil's sugar economy suffered greatly as the Caribbean gained a greater presence in international sugar trade.
As a result, people embarked on expeditions to inland Brazil to seek more resources. The expeditions are divided into two types, the entradas and the bandeiras.
The entradas were decreed by the Portuguese crown and were financed by the colonial government. Its main objective was to find mineral riches as well as to chart unknown territory.
The others were known as bandeiras, private initiatives sponsored and carried out mostly by settlers of the Sao Paulo region. The expeditions of the bandeirantes, as these adventurers were called, were aimed at obtaining native slaves for trade and finding mineral riches.
At the end of the 17th century, gold was discovered because of these expeditions, allowing Brazil to regain global economic influence. Woohoo!
The slaves from the plantations transitioned to work in gold mines. There were diamond mines too, but mainly gold mines brought in the profit.
This led to further expansion of the land. By 1720, the borders reached the same extent as modern Brazil, encompassing both the highlands and the majority of the Amazon basin.
By this time as well, Brazil was dubbed by the king as a viceroyalty, ruled by the Viceroy of Brazil. A viceroy is a royal official who runs a colony in the name of and as a representative of the monarch.
Political systems had to be much more costly and extensive in Brazil compared to those of the French and British colonies simply due to the massive expanse of land that had to be regulated.
Gold exports grew and grew until they peaked in 1750, as there was a kind of gold rush. Portuguese wanted to emigrate to the colony to get gold for themselves, much to the concern of the Portuguese government. Heavy taxes continued to be placed by the monarchy as well.
Gold was shipped through ports in or near Rio de Janeiro, prompting the transfer of the capital to Rio de Janeiro in 1763.
Nearing the independence of Brazil in the late 1700s, the gold mines were almost depleted and the majority of the economy turned to subsistence farming.
Prince João, the major advocate for Brazil's independence, arrived in Salvador when the royal court transferred to Brazil to evade Bonaparte. He assisted to break the colonial pact of mercantilism with Portugal by signing a commercial regulation that allowed trade with England.
In 1815, during the Congress of Vienna, Prince João created the United Kingdom of Portugal, Brazil, and the Algarves.
That is, Reino Unido de Portugal, Brasil e Algarves.
Right. Elevating Brazil to the rank of Portugal and increasing its administrative independence, although not fully independent yet.
Finally, in 1822, King João's son, Pedro, declared official independence as a constitutional monarchy, the Empire of Brazil.
The end.
Goodbye now.
Excuse me, but I believe you people failed to mention the Portuguese outposts in Canada. You know, Bona Vista in 1497 and the land of the Labrador in 1499? Yes?
No.
Oh, you mean like Fernandes Labrador, the Portuguese mariner?
I do know that the Corte Real brothers explored Newfoundland in 1500 and 1501.
So did Portugal retain these lands or gain profit?
What materials does Canada have?
Well, Canada does collect oil, coal, diamonds, wood, and fish.
Yes, and that is why Portugal liked Canada.
Oh, Canadian fishing industry.
Precisely. The Portuguese established the fishing industry off the coast of Newfoundland.
And then they taxed the fish.
Actually, the Portuguese cod fishing boats still go to Newfoundland every year.
Are we done yet?
Yes.
Finally.
I'm off to Rio.
What? What are you talking about?
The bird movie guys?
Oh, right.
Let me take you to Rio, Rio. Fly over the ocean like an eagle, eagle. And we can chill in my gazebo, gazebo.